The NBA regular season is about to start. As the MLB playoffs are going on, I wanted to do an NBA preview episode or two. We'll do one for the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference to project how I have those teams expected in the standings. Last year, I did something very similar. So we're going to do this year's version with a lot of hot takes in here. Without further ado, let's get started. I want to thank each and every one of you for listening or watching this episode of the podcast. If you are listening on a podcast app, thank you very much. We're also live on YouTube. All of these episodes are going up. Every single podcast episode is going up to the channel. You can find us if you search Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast, or just check the description of wherever you're listening, and it should have the link there. You can also access various platforms in the link, including our socials. You can find us on Instagram at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on TikTok at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on Twitter at LOT Sports Pod, on Facebook, Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast over there. You can visit our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. There you can access the podcast, the YouTube, the newsletter, the Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, what haven't I mentioned? The merch, all on the website. So feel free to click over there. Lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com, or like I mentioned in the description of the podcast or in the YouTube video as well. This is an NBA preview, prediction and preview episode. We're starting first with the Eastern Conference, and we'll have another episode coming out soon on the Western Conference. A bit before we get started, I'm just going to go through the teams and their additions, their subtractions, and how I see them playing out this year. But I wanted to give a brief discussion at the beginning of this. There is a giant race at the bottom of the NBA this year, and it's something that I think is kind of unprecedented. We have a crazy talent in Victor Wembanyama, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen highlights of him, if you haven't heard of him, just Google his name. Google Victor NBA prospect, and it'll come up because Wembanyama might be a bit hard to spell, but he's an incredible talent. If you're not familiar, he's 7'4". He's got an 8-foot wingspan. And he handles the ball much like a small forward would. He's got an incredible shot. He's he's hitting step back threes and taking the ball down the court, dunking while barely jumping. He's such an incredible talent, both offensively and defensively. And there will be teams that are desperate to get to the bottom of the rankings to draft him. I think that's a large reason that teams like the Utah Jazz have taken this year as an opportunity to really finally tank, because if they are the worst team in the league and they get that first overall pick, which it's a lottery, so you never know who's going to get it, but if they do get that opportunity, that'll be immense for them and for any team that does luck into it. So that'll be a theme throughout these episodes, especially in the Western Conference. There's more teams at the bottom tier, not as much in the East, but I thought it was something that I talk about at the start. Scoot Henderson looked good in their preview game as well, if you find highlights of that. But Victor looks incredible, and any team should be excited to get the first overall pick. He's rated as the best prospect since LeBron by some, and some say that he's the best prospect in NBA history. I don't know if I buy into all that, but I could see him being a top end talent right away if his health stays consistent. So that'll be a running theme throughout the bottom of these rankings. Without further ado, I wanted to get into this teams. I'm starting, of course, this is the Eastern Conference episode. I'm starting 15-1 in the Eastern Conference. And I'm going to keep looking down in this direction if you're watching on YouTube, just to, check on my notes. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to remember everything that I wanted to talk about today. So if you see me look in that direction, that's what that's about. First, we have the Pacers, and I talk about teams that are tanking for Victor Wembanyama, and I think this is the only team that's honestly doing it in the East. Maybe more should be, but I think this is the only team that is. So far, gains this offseason, they've drafted Benedict Mathurin, drafted Andrew Nembhard, and a few others that I don't think are going to have significant roles. They got Daniel Tyson, Aaron Nesmith in the trade that sent Malcolm Brogdon to Boston. And then in the loss category, obviously Brogdon, but they also lost Ricky Rubio as a free agent to Cleveland. But I mean, they never really had him. They just traded for him after he got hurt with the Cavs. So it was more of a contract situation. And they lost TJ Warren to free agency to the Nets. I think for them, their young talent is clearly starting to build. I think the Domantas Sabonis deal for Tyrese Halliburton was a big win for them. They got a really steady young talent. I think trading Buddy Hield and Miles Turner could be their next way of getting some strong talent, whether that be in the Lakers deal for, Westbrook and picks and then waiving Westbrook, or whoever it may be, whatever picks it may be, whatever contender may take them on. I feel like there's another way to get more assets for the future. Good for them for finally rebuilding, by the way. They should have rebuilt several years ago, really when Paul George left, and they never did. And so, good for them for finally making that step. I do like the guard combo of Benedict Mathurin, Tyrese Halliburton, and Chris Duarte. I think it'll be interesting to watch. It'll be a fun conversation at hand, especially because none of them are really big enough to start at small forward. So they're going to have to kind of balance out the minutes. I do like Chris Duarte kind of as that fireball off the bench, but we'll see how they rotate him into the future. In all reality, 5 years down the road, we could be looking at one of these guys getting traded, but as of now, they'll be fun to watch. I think overall, this ranking at 15 is not an indication of their hopelessness, just that it's a stage in their process, right? They finally made the decision to trade away their assets to, commit to the rebuild, which they were hesitant about. Being in Indiana, they don't have a huge fan base, they don't have a lot of attendance. So ownership was, obviously concerned about that, but it's a smart decision. And I think they're going to ascend in the coming years, but this is just going to be one of those rebuilding years. And so that's why I have them at 15. Next up at number 14, I have a team that is not looking to be at 14. This is not one of those teams that's tanking for Victor Wembanyama, but it's just the situation and their circumstance. I think this next tier is kind of loaded in the East. And it's the Charlotte Hornets. They made minimal gains. They re-signed Cody Martin and drafted Mark Williams, but they lost Miles Bridges. Obviously, he's not coming back to the NBA after his domestic violence situation. But because Bridges is no longer with them, they lost their second best scoring option and really didn't replace him whatsoever. It's really so strange. I don't know if they just missed out on all free agents, or they didn't know who to go after, or they were waiting for a big trade. But I think James Bouknight's development is going to be a story, and maybe it's the lack thereof of his development that's going to be the story. I feel like he was a valuable draft pick when they took him, and they haven't developed him well enough. And you just got to wonder how long you can sustain a team with LaMelo Ball and a bunch of nobodies before he starts to be, concerned about the future of this team. They don't have enough top end talent. They don't have enough depth to keep up with this crowd in middle tiers. That's why I have them at 14. Obviously, it was disappointing for them last year. They made the play in and kind of whippered out. Obviously, they made a coaching change, but I just don't believe in them overall. And so that's why I have them at 14th. Up next at 13th, I have the Magic. They got Paolo Banchero first overall, extended Gary Harris, re-signed Mo Bamba and Bol Bol, and they only lost Robin Lopez, although they didn't use him all too well last year. I think Paolo Banchero was a great pick first overall. He looks good so far in summer league and training camp and preseason, but I think his chemistry with their young core is really going to be the focal point of this season. They have Cole Anthony, they have RJ Hampton, Markelle Fultz to a lesser extent, Jalen Suggs after he comes back from injury, Franz Wagner. They have a good young core building, and Paolo adds to that. I think he'll be fun to watch. He won't be relied on too much to really initiate the offense. He can be that slasher, that guy who can get a bucket when he needs to, who can be a lob threat. I think he's going to be fun to watch down in Orlando. Their young core could really take a jump overall. I think all of them have decent amounts of talent, and Paolo seems very NBA ready. So they could be higher than 13th, but just because I haven't seen it yet, I don't think that they'll be much higher. If they make the play-in somehow, I think you could look to see Jamal Mosley's name in Coach of the Year discussions, just because how awful they've been for years. I mean, who was the last, outside of a couple of 7th or 8th seed appearances in the playoffs, who was the last good Magic team? Dwight Howard, maybe. It's been a long time since they've been in contention, and they've got a good young core that could be set up for the future. So, 13th, like the Pacers, isn't necessarily an indication of hopelessness, but it's just where I have them right now. And I could easily see them taking a jump next year, or even this year, if that young core does take that step up that I mentioned. Next up at 12, I have the Detroit Pistons. Similar situation, right? Young team going on. They've definite gains in this offseason. They drafted Jaden Ivey, drafted Jalen Duran. They traded for Alec Burks, traded for Nerlens Noel, re-signed Marvin Bagley. They lost Jeremy Grant in the trade. But they have one of the better young cores in the league, and they could take that jump up like the Magic. I believe in Cade's talent a lot. I like Killian Hayes off the bench. I love Jaden Ivey next to Cade Cunningham. I think that's a great fit. And I think Cade could have really a coming out show this year, which could propel them forward. The Jeremy Grant trade, I think, was a great one. I think this is exactly what every team who's expecting to lose should do. You don't have young players yet, right? Past few years don't have young players. So you bring in Jeremy Grant, who's that veteran presence. You pay him well, maybe more than any contending team would have. And as the salary cap increases, you hold on to him for a few years, let him show out with increased usage rate, and then you trade him to a contender that needs that extra piece. All of a sudden, since the salary cap's increased, that contending team is fine with taking on that contract, and maybe they're desperate. Maybe Portland is to get that extra star alongside Dame to try to compete. But I think this is, and you get these assets back for the future. I think this is the perfect move from a rebuilding standpoint. It's exactly what every team that's expecting to be bad should do in the NBA. And it was a great experience for them. Netted in Jalen Duran, who was really the second best big man in the draft, but behind Chet Holmgren, who we'll talk about in the next episode, the Western Conference episode. But I think he was the second best big man in the draft. And, he was a great pickup for them. Really good complement to their young guard core. Reminds me of the Jets a lot. I know this is a bit of a stretch, but I'm a Jets fan, and so it's been on my mind recently where the Jets had this, these several years of being bad. They traded away some assets, notably Jamal Adams, and got picks back. And they had quite a few early picks in this past year's draft. They drafted Breece Hall in the second round, and early on they drafted Sauce Gardner. They drafted Garrett Wilson. They drafted Jermaine Johnson. They had a really great draft because they played their cards well as they were rebuilding. That's exactly what the Pistons did with Jeremy Grant. And this draft could end up being a good one. Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duran, and they've got some good young pieces already. And so I think they could be in for a jump, but not a huge one. And next year we'll look to see that talent really develop. But that's why I have them at 12, just out of the plan. The next team, the closest to the plan, but not making it, I have is the Wizards. They re-signed Bradley Beal. They got Will Barton and Monte Morris in the trade where they gave up Contavious Caldwell-Pope. They also drafted Johnny Davis, but they did lose Thomas Bryant, KCP, and Ish Smith via trade, that same Nuggets trade. The Bradley Beal contract sucks. And I don't mean it sucks because they overpaid him, but they did. But I mean it sucks just because it's what they had to do. They paid him $250 million with a full no trade clause in his contract. Because what other option was there? Are they going to let him walk? I mean, they should have traded him last year, in my opinion, and committed to a full-blown rebuild. But they're not really content with doing that. And, they made a win-now trade, albeit losing a major piece in KCP. They got some depth back. Will Barton, is definitely a piece that could play a role. Monte Morris is probably going to be their backup point guard with Bradley Beal starting at that position now. But I feel like they don't know which direction they're going in. They don't have enough top end talent. I don't believe in Kristaps Porzingis as a number 2 option. I don't believe in Bradley Beal as a number 1 to make any noise. Their depth could keep them afloat enough, but I don't think they make the plan. Could they realize a rebuild is in store? Hopefully, but I doubt so. So, who knows? I think out of all the teams that I'm talking about today, the Wizards fans should be the least hopeful out of all of them because their management really doesn't seem to know what they're doing. Next up at 10, just making the play-in, I have the Knicks. Disappointing season last year, but they did bring in Jalen Brunson. They re-signed Mitchell Robinson, brought in Isaiah Hartenstein, an underrated, really good pickup for them. They traded away Kemba Walker, Alec Burks, and Nerlens Noel, and let Taj Gibson walk in free agency in favor of giving minutes to Hartenstein and Jericho Sims. I like their moves a lot. Nothing drastic, but they made a key addition in Jalen Brunson, overall improved their roster. I think RJ Barrett's development is going to be key to their season, right? He took a significant step up last year. I think if he takes that step up in all-star status, they could be a little bit higher than this. I don't think they get out of the play-in just because the top tier in the East is loaded, in my opinion. But overall, I think his development is key. I'm glad they didn't trade him for Donovan Mitchell. I talked about that a little bit when the Mitchell trade happened. If you want, go back and check out that video talking about the trade to the Cavs. We'll talk about, relatively soon. But, if they could have got him without RJ Barrett, then it would have been a smart move. But supposedly they couldn't. So I like that they kept on RJ Barrett. I think he's a good pair next to Jalen Brunson. Julius Randle is another key storyline. His contract is awful. His value is at an all-time low right now. I could see them moving him, but at the same time, it would be a significant loss. If he doesn't improve and there is, a similar level of interest, maybe flipping him for, a salary like Russell Westbrook where they can get off of it quickly might be a smart idea. I don't know. They've gotten better for sure in the offseason. And, that's indicated by the fact that I moved them up a few slots from where they were last year. I believe they finished 13th last year, maybe 12th in the standings. I have them at 10th. But the rest of the East also got better. So that's why I couldn't bring them much higher. But, an interesting team to watch for sure. So that's why I have them at 10. I think they'll make the play in. I don't know if they'll win a game, but, I think it's a satisfactory performance given their talent level. Next up, we have the Bulls at number 9. One of the major storylines of last year, their gains, they re-signed Zach LaVine, added Andre Drummond and Goran Dragic via free agency. They re-signed Derek Jones, drafted Dalen Terry. They lost Troy Brown Jr. in free agency to the Lakers, but this season comes down to what their core does, right? Unless DeMar continues on a major tear, they're going to have a regression. And I don't see him putting up another season like he did last year. Even if he does, I think we saw in the back half of the season what they truly are. They're a middling team in the East. They're not quite in that upper tier, and that upper tier has really expanded over the past year and a half. So, maybe that play toward the end of last year was more of an indicator of their talent, and that's why I have them at 9 here. If Lonzo could ever get healthy, we could see what this core looks like. Lonzo and Caruso and DeMar and LaVine and Vucevic, but he's going to be out for a large part of this season. Who knows if he'll even play this season? It really sucks because he's fun to watch. I think he has really not been given a fair shake till he got to Chicago, and now injuries have really been an issue for him. Vucevic has been an issue defensively for sure, and on a team that needed some impact defenders when Lonzo and Caruso went down, Vucevic was not that, but he is an expiring deal. If they feel they need to get off of him in the off season or in the middle of the season, they can do that. I don't think they will. I don't think their upper talent is good enough to propel them into that upper tier, which is why I have them at 9. Next up at number 8, we have the Raptors. This feels really low for the Raptors. I'm going to be honest. I really wanted to put them 5 or 6, but I just couldn't. They re-signed Chris Boucher, extended Thad Young, signed Otto Porter Jr. and Juancho Hernan-Gomez in free agency, and they really lost nothing. They have really good depth. Scotty Barnes is fun to watch, and if he takes a jump, this team could be even higher than I have them projected, but I really have trouble putting them up there without knowing. The starting lineup is good, right? You have Fred VanVleet at point. I think still the addition of Gary Trent Jr. was something I'll talk about for the end of time. That trade was great for them and bad for the Trailblazers. OG Anunoby, of course, Pascal Siakam, and Scotty Barnes starting at center. I think their starting lineup is good. The depth isn't great, but Scotty Barnes is incredible to watch. And if he takes a step up, he could easily be an all-star this year. And that could really propel them if Pascal Siakam is that all NBA caliber player and Fred VanVleet's that borderline all-star caliber player. They could be definitely higher than the 8th seed. I have them making the play-in, but I think they'll definitely get out of it and take one of the 7th or 8th seeds in the playoffs. Next up, I have the Hawks at 7, similar to the Raptors. This feels really low. They made major gains in the offseason, right? Traded for DeJounte Murray, traded for Justin Holiday, drafted AJ Griffin, traded for Mo Harkless. But at the end of the day, they also lost Gallinari. They also traded Kevin Huerter, which was a confusing move in my mind, and they lost DeLon Wright to free agency. Overall, I'm really excited for the DeJounte Murray and Trae Young pairing. I think Trae plays better off the ball than most people give him credit for. I think people just assume because he has the ball in his hands that he's not going to be good off ball, but if he moves around a lot, he could play a lot like Steph Curry off ball, which I think is not bad. I think it's a good situation to have, and DeJounte Murray is a good compliment. He also doesn't need the ball in his hands all the time, so I think it could be a good pair. They have a high ceiling, right? I could easily see them making an Eastern Conference final, and I know that's high. There's a really high ceiling, but I think they could reach that level of talent. I think they've got good depth, right? But what the season comes down to in my mind is whether Clint Capella could be that defensive anchor and complement their other impact defensive players. I talked about DeJounte Murray and his impact on the defensive side of the ball. It's definitely there, but players like DeAndre Hunter, players like Onyeka Okongwu could really be unlocked if they have that guy, in the middle, in the paint, protecting the rim, blocking shots. And that's what Clint Capella was for a large majority of his career. And last year he seemed to take a step back. Maybe it's his injuries, maybe it's athletics, athletically he's declining. But if he's going to be able to take that step up again and really be that defensive anchor, they could be way higher than this. Jay Crowder also could be on the way for them, which I think would be an interesting piece. A lot of people have theorized that DeAndre Hunter could be in the return, but I don't like that move for Atlanta. I think DeAndre Hunter is only moved for impact star. And since they already got an all-star caliber player in this offseason, I doubt that Hunter's going to be on the move for another one. But Crowder could be in for some other salary match. I'm not too sure on the logistics of that. And I think he'd be a good piece for them. I have them at 7, but they could be higher. I think both them and the Raptors definitely get out of the play-in and take those 7th and 8th spots, no matter which one ends up in which. Next up at 6, I have the Heat. I know people are going to think this is low, and I don't agree with them in this case. I think this might be high for them, and I know they've been a top 3 seed, year after year, no matter the losses. But let me talk about their offseason. They re-signed Victor Oladipo, re-signed Caleb Martin, re-signed Dwayne Dedmon, drafted Nikola Jovic, lost PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris to free agency. This whole offseason felt like the Heat were ready to make a big trade. Felt like they were poised for that Kevin Durant, addition, or that Donovan Mitchell edition, and it just never happened. And it felt like they were waiting for that moment. And then when the music stopped, they were left without a chair, and they didn't make major upgrades. I don't know who's starting at power forward. Is it Caleb Martin? Is it Max Strus? Is it Jimmy Butler? He said it's not him, but I don't know who's starting at power forward for the Miami Heat. I don't know who's playing power forward minutes. It feels like they have no power forwards on the roster right now. Jovic could be valuable just because they desperately need depth at that position, but he seems a bit raw from what I've seen of him, and who knows what kind of impact he makes. I realize this is a low ranking, but they lost key pieces in a key position. They have no solid replacements, and unless Lowry really takes that step back to where he was before last season, I don't see them as real title contenders. I think their talent will keep them, at the 6th seed, obviously, but I don't know if they win more than one round in the playoffs, if that. I just don't believe in this iteration of the Heat team. Next up at number 5, I have the Cavs. Wanted to put them higher, but I didn't end up doing it. They obviously traded for Donovan Mitchell in the offseason, extended Darius Garland, and they got Ricky Rubio and Robin Lopez in free agency. 2 underrated moves, in my opinion. They lost Colin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen in the trade to get Donovan Mitchell. One of the bigger winners of the offseason, right? Donovan Mitchell was a surprise move to go to the Cavs. Everyone thought he was going to the Knicks. Big swing, and their young core is locked up for a long time, right? We have Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Isaac Okoro. Who am I missing? Is that it? I think that's it. Karis LeVert, I wouldn't really consider him part of the young core, but they have good depth, right? Off the bench. So if you think of their starters as Garland, Mitchell, either Okoro or LeVert, and then Mobley and Allen, then they have the other of Okoro or LeVert, Ricky Rubio, Kevin Love, Robin Lopez off the bench, and then they'll probably stagger Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell's minutes to give at least one of them, time on the floor as a main scoring option at all times. I really, really like the offseason for them, and I think they could be a real title contender. I think the regular season will be kind of a feeling out point, which is why I couldn't really put them higher. But I would not at all be surprised if they have a championship in store this year or next or in the near future. This young core is only getting better, and I think they're good complements to one another. The Cavs did a rebuild right. When LeBron James left, they tore everything down. They did exactly what you should do in a rebuild, and shout out to them and their management office. They've done a really good job, but I have them at number 5 nonetheless. Number 4, I have the Nets, and my Nets bias wanted to rank them higher, right? But they made good gains in the offseason. They signed TJ Warren out of free agency, traded for Royce O'Neal, brought in Markieff Morris, and re-signed Nick Claxton and Patty Mills. but they did lose Drummond, Brown, and Bruce Brown and Goran Dragic via free agency. I think their gains that I've talked about are not the significant gains they'll be making. I think getting Ben Simmons back and healthy and playing meaningful basketball and getting Joe Harris back and, being a good role player, making good shots is going to be key for them. Um, this is the best situation Ben Simmons could have been and could be in his career, right? You have incredible spacing around him. Think about this. He's going to play in lineups with Joe Harris, Seth Curry, Royce O'Neal, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. There's incredible shooting. TJ Warren, Cam Thomas. There's incredible shooting options on this team that will allow him the spacing to be able to roam down the middle of the court. The big obstruction to that is Nick Claxton. And I don't love their fit next to each other. And it's a large reason why I can't rank them higher. Maybe Claxton gets flipped in a deal for a guy like Miles Turner, or I don't know what other path there is to getting a shooting big alongside Ben Simmons. Maybe Ben Simmons is the big. Maybe he is a center on defense and a point guard on offense. But he's in his best situation to succeed, and he really needs to be aggressive in this offense for them to have success. Overall, the talent should keep them afloat, assuming no major dramatic issues, which they could happen. I think they become dangerous in the postseason. Like I said, the 3-point spacing is incredible, and the offseason moves that they made really are great compliments to their core, their big three. And so that's why I don't think they necessarily stress about getting a high seed in the regular season, but I still think they're a threat in the playoffs, and so I have them at number 4. Next up at number 3, we have the Eastern Conference champions, Boston Celtics. They added Malcolm Brogdon and Danilo Gallinari in the offseason, Brogdon via trade and Gallinari via free agency. They lost Tyson Neesmith in that Malcolm Brogdon trade. The Celtics made solid improvements to areas that were obvious holes, right? Last season, we saw they needed a backup point guard and they needed solid power forward play. You saw that really when Robert Williams went down, Al Horford kind of had to play those center minutes, and they didn't have a guy who could really replace him. And in terms of point guard play, when Marcus Smart was on the bench, the best creator was Derek White, who's really more of a combo guard. I'd almost rather play him at small forward than point guard. So it was a situation for them that wasn't great. And, they tried to address them. They tried to address these holes, right, with Horford signing at the beginning of the year, with bringing in Derek White halfway through in the trade deadline, which I love as a move. But I think Malcolm Brogdon really fills that point guard hole really well. I feel like he could be starting by season end, but he'll start coming off the bench. I should say he'll start the season coming off the bench, if that makes sense. I think Gallinari was an underrated pickup. He's a little past his prime, but he could play valuable minutes for them off the bench. They made actual major improvements, and that's going to be key. Another key that I think is going to be interesting is the culture, right? Ime Udoka is not going to be coaching them this year. And that whole drama and that situation could play out very differently for them, and they could be a lower seed. But I think their top end talent, Jason Tatum's incredible. He's a top 10 NBA player. Jaylen Brown is an all-star caliber player. Marcus Smart's an incredible defender, albeit a bit floppish, but I have to poke my fun as a Nets fan. I think their depth should be enough to keep them in a lot of games where they really shouldn't be, and having two bona fide killers in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I think will win them a lot of games. So that's why I have them at 3. Next up, number 2, the Philadelphia 76ers. This is a team that I think is going to care a lot about the regular season. And so maybe their talent shouldn't keep them at number 2, but that's why I have them here. They made major gains in the offseason, and it's in large part because James Harden took a lesser contract. Whether that be his true market value or not, maybe that's your own opinion. But they re-signed James Harden, brought in PJ Tucker via free agency, as well as Daniel House in free agency, and traded for DeAnthony Melton. In that trade, they gave up Danny Green, and they also lost DeAndre Jordan in free agency. Who gives a crap? They added great depth at the end of the day. PJ Tucker, DeAnthony Melton, Daniel House, I thought were all great additions to a team that looked to not have depth after the Ben Simmons, James Harden trade last year. They gave up Drummond, they gave up Curry, and those were big pieces for them. And they made major improvements in this offseason. I think they're going to be a good regular season team that blows a lot of people out. Embiid's a real enforcer. He's going to be an MVP candidate. I don't think he wins it this year, but with their scoring capabilities, they're going to blow a lot of teams out. And the back end of their rotation is really going to be better than a back end of a lot of teams' rotations that they're going to face. this may be a hot take, but I think in the playoffs, they're only going to be a championship contender if Tyrese Maxey is their second best player. And he could be. He could be. And let me say that he needs to be the second best player because he's taken a step up and not because James Harden has taken a step down. He needs to be that second star, that all-star caliber player for them to have a real chance at a championship. I think I'm saying that because James Harden is not that superstar level talent anymore. He's a borderline all-star. And nowadays, no matter your depth, a borderline all-star is not good enough as your second best player to compete for a championship, no matter how good your best player is. And Joel Embiid is a top 5 or so player in the NBA, maybe a little bit past that. But if James Harden or Tyrese Maxey is not a solid all-star, then I don't know that this team could really compete for a championship, even if they're a higher seed in the regular season. Like I said, they're going to try hard in the regular season, so that's why I have them at 2. But the playoffs will really be when their names are made, and we'll see what happens. And then number 1, the only team we have left, obviously the Milwaukee Bucks, on sheer talent alone. It's going to be not a lot of effort, but just a regular season juggernaut of a team. And any team that has Giannis and Middleton and Holiday and the depth they have is going to be a juggernaut. They got Joe Ingles in free agency, extended Pat Connaughton, re-signed Bobby Portis, Wes Matthews, Javon Carter, and Serge Ibaka. They lost Rajon Tucker to international free agency. I believe he went to Australia, maybe Europe. I don't really remember. No major losses otherwise. I think they looked good last year when they were healthy. They lost in large part because Chris Middleton got hurt, and that's the playoffs. That's how it works. They really only won their ring, in my opinion, because Kyrie Irving and James Harden got hurt. So you can't say anything about should have won, could have won, right? But they have the top end talent to be a championship contender year after year. No drastic moves should have been made, and none were made, and good for them. I think their additions were, well, I should say their only addition was Joe Ingles. I think he was a good underrated signing and could be valuable for them in the starting lineup or off the bench if he proves that his shot is true. If he could be a quality role player, they've only gotten better from last year. I think Giannis really is an MVP contender this year, and I think he's my pick to win it. I think there's media narratives behind every MVP pick, and they didn't want Giannis to repeat after 2 years, even though he had just as good of a season. Jokic won 2 years straight. I don't think they pick Jokic again to win it. There's a very few candidates for the MVP in my mind, just because of how teams have, various star level depth. I don't think, for example, Kevin Durant could win it if Kyrie Irving's there all the time, staying healthy. I don't think Jokic is going to win it if Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray come back and play well. I'll talk about the Nuggets on the next episode, the Western Conference preview and prediction. But I think Giannis will have that narrative behind him, even though Middleton and Holiday are there. I think they're a little worse than those other players I mentioned. Maybe not Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., but the narratives won't be as strong for them as they will be in Denver. So I think Giannis will take home the MVP award. I think the Bucks will be an excellent regular season team. They'll host every series in the playoffs except maybe the finals. I'll talk about who I have first overall seeding in the finals. The Western Conference episode, who I think will be better off just because the West is not as deep in this upper tier. So, the Bucks will be the number 1 seed in the East, at least. I think they're an incredible team, and every Bucks fan should be excited for now and in, the not so near future, because they're going to be a contending team for a long time. And they're fun to watch. I mean, Giannis is a bulldozer down the paint. And who doesn't love that kind of athletic, I wouldn't say stubborn play, but, someone who's just not afraid to get hurt and is ready to take on the strongest of physical challenges. He's fun to watch. Well, that'll do it for the second annual Eastern Conference predictions and projections, or whatever I'm calling this episode. If you liked it, stay tuned for our Western Conference version, wherever you're listening or watching this. If you aren't already subscribed on YouTube, go ahead, head over to the channel, or if you're already on it, click that red subscribe button down below. Click the little bell and you'll get notified whenever a podcast episode comes up or any of our other daily YouTube content. We have incredible series out on the channel. Click the playlist button on the channel to view all of those. Click the like button if you enjoyed the content. Click the description in both the podcast or the newsletter, I should say podcast or the YouTube video, to view all our other content, including the newsletter, including the merchandise available on our website, including all the socials. on Instagram at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on TikTok at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on Twitter at LOT Sports Pod. Thank you very much for listening or watching this episode of the podcast, and have a wonderful rest of your day.